Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph, and I'm here with Konadu, and we are we're software engineers from Turntable. We're here to present to you the Common Architecture Language Model, or CALM, this fantastic tool that will supercharge how you manage enterprise architecture. When it comes to managing enterprise architecture, there are a few problems that abound. Paramount among them is the lack of consistent traditional architectural formats across the firm. Different teams are using siloed tools, Plant2ML, C4, Mermaid, Visio, Draw.io. The biggest problem with this is that it's hard to be productive, it's hard to collaborate. We can't share patterns, we can't share workflows across teams. So we're doing the same things over and over again, going through the same security reviews, operational reviews, increasing the burden on manual reviews. The other big problem is it's hard to automate a validation of an architecture against a pattern. We've gone through a review, we've accepted that this pattern meets our policies, standards, organizational standards, but we can't validate that an architecture that has been produced meets those patterns. And that's what CALM seeks to solve. CALM is a JSON-based meta schema that allows you to define your architecture as JSON, as a flat JSON of nodes and relationships. Why JSON? JSON is familiar with most developers. Most teams use JSON in their tooling, so it's easy to create tooling around it. Speaking of tooling, we have a CLI that allows you to validate your architecture against a pattern. We create a pattern, use a CLI, check if that pattern meets all the organizational standards and policies. And in one CI/CD pipeline, you can tell that what this person has created conforms to what we have agreed prior. CALM also features a centralized storage called CALM Hub. And essentially, it's like NPM for architectures. I can create a pattern, post it to CALM Hub, and another developer in another team can pull the architecture, create an instance of it, and validate and put it back to CALM Hub. Without talking too much about it, we're going to show you a quick demo about how CALM actually works, and I'll pass it over to Konadu.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So as Joseph has mentioned, we are going to show you an opinionated pattern of a 3-tier architecture. Then we are going to push this pattern to CALM Hub. Then we are going to simulate an architect pulling this pattern from CALM Hub and then creating an instance of an architecture from the pattern. Then we are going to push this architecture back to CALM Hub and visualize the architecture so we all see. So this is the workflow of the pattern that I'm going to show you. So in this pattern, we are going to have a React.js or a Spring Client application communicate with a producer service. And this producer service is also going to communicate with a producer database, a Postgres database or a Mongo database. As I've mentioned, it's a 3-tier application. So it's always going to be either the React or the Spring Client application or the Postgres database or the Mongo database. So this is how the pattern looks like. And then a pattern is a way that you can create an opinionated or a standard, it's a way you create a standard JSON that your team or your bunch of architects can actually create an instance of an architecture from. So you define a standard, and based on that standard, your team can create architectures from that pattern. So if you look at this pattern, when you look at line 7, where you have nodes, you'd see nodes is one of the building blocks of CALM. And then CALM has 5 building blocks, so we'll be going through them as we go through the pattern. And then what nodes are usually the boxes that you see in the architecture diagram. And then they are used to define databases, systems, networks, what have you. And in this pattern, when you look at line 9 and line 10, you see that we have specified minimum items or maximum items, and we gave it a value of 3. Because we are doing a 3-tier architecture like I showed you in the flow diagram, you have to have a minimum, we specified a minimum or a maximum of 3. And when you come down to...
I think you have to move it to the left. Yeah.
And when you come down to line 13, we have a one-off. What the one-off does is, because we said we have to choose between either a React database or a Spring service, you have to have the one-off to specify the condition, which is one of the good things about JSON. And when you scroll down a bit and you come to line 17 where you have properties, that's where we start to define the properties of the node. And then some of the properties that you define in a node are the unique ID that makes sure that your node is unique and distinct. We also specify the name, the description, that will help with your visualization of your diagram. And then we also have the node type where you can specify if it's a database, if it's a network, if it's a person or a system. Then we have one of the building blocks of COMS that we are also specifying in this pattern, which is the metadata. And what metadata allows you to do is to define additional properties that we do not have in the COM basic properties or the key properties of COM. So here we specify technology here on line 33. And we have the same for the Spring Client service that we showed, then a metadata as well. And when you go down to, so this is the producer service. So this is the next node, and that is the producer service. But the producer service is not placed under any condition because it is the required node for any instance of an architecture that you create. And we also specify the properties, the name, and we added one of the COM building blocks, which is interface. So interface is the third building block I'm talking about. We spoke about the node, is the second, sorry. And what interface is that? It allows you to specify or define how other nodes in your architecture would communicate with that particular node. And in this is the producer node. And so we specify how other nodes that will be either the React or the databases will communicate with the producer. And here we have two types of interfaces that we specified. So on line 88, you realize that we have the, on line 88, you realize that we have the URL interface that is being specified, which will define how URLs will communicate with the producer node. And when you come down to line 96, we have the path interface being defined, which means that you can have APIs communicate. Those will define how APIs will communicate to the producer node. When we scroll down, we have we define the third node, which is also the database node, and then that, because you have to select one, that is also put in a one-off condition. So we'll go to the next building block, which is relationships. Relationships are usually the arrows that you would find in your architecture diagrams, and they define how your nodes or your components communicate with each other. So here we also have the one-off again that you can see on line 155, and you also have some properties that I define, like the unique ID for that relationship, the description, and also the type of relationship that those nodes would have. So here you see that on line 168, we defined connect. And in connect, we specify the source and we specify the destination using the IDs of those nodes. One other thing that we added to this relationship, which is the next building block I'll be talking about, is controls. Controls is where you're able to define your functional and non-functional requirements for your architecture. So for this relationship, we specify the security control, specifically an architecture control. And I want to show you how the architecture control looks like. So here, we want that any instance of an architecture that is created from this pattern should have these properties defined under controls, which includes the authentication method, the description of your control, your token expiry. You have to specify if it's a multi-factor authentication, some token revocations, and any other additional properties that you want to add. Then on line 46, you'd see that we added an example of how a control that you would add to your architecture should look like. And that we usually call that a control config, which defines how you're going to implement the control that you're adding to your pattern. So basically, this is an example of a pattern that we just showed you. This is just a 3-tier pattern. And if you want to create any form of pattern for your organization, you can do that. It can be bigger than this. You can have as many nodes or relationships as you want in your pattern. So what we are going to do now is we are going to, just as I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to push this pattern to COM Hub. Then we are going to have the architect simulated. So first, I want to show you this is COM Hub. It has where you can push your architecture, your pattern, and also visualize it. We are going to push it under OSSF 2025. And if you go to patterns, at the moment, you realize that we do not have any patterns available. So let's go back and now push a pattern. Sorry. Okay, so we are going to do that now. Sorry.
You have to do hyphen in.
So here you see that a pattern has been pushed successfully. So if we go back to OSSF, we go to patterns. This specifies the ID of the pattern and the version, because you can have multiple versions of the same instance. You see that our pattern has been pushed to Calm Hub. So I'm going to pass over to Joseph, who is going to act as an architect who will pull this, create an instance of this pattern, and then push back to Calm Hub for visualization.
All right, thank you. So Konadu is an architect in a different firm, in a different unit, different business units altogether. And I'm the different units, separate units, could be a different country. Now I want to make use of her 3D architecture pattern in my day-to-day. So this is going to be my view. So I'm going to first pull this from Calm Hub. Like I said, Calm Hub is like NPM for architectures. So I have a pipeline script that can do this, but we can do this in a myriad of ways. That's the beauty of Calm. You can build your own tooling around it. So I'm going to call pull. The namespace is OSFF. No, sorry. Namespace is OSFF 2025. The ID was 2. The version was 1.0.1. And I want it to be saved as 3-tier downloaded.json. All right, so as you can see, I've put into my workspace. Of course, your workflow could vary. You could actually point directly to Calm Hub and then do the subsequent activity I'm about to do. So this is the pattern that Konadu defined. Now I want to create an instance of architecture, an actual architecture from this pattern. And that's where the Calm CLI comes in. I'm going to use the Calm CLI to generate an instance of this pattern. So Calm generate the pattern 3-tier downloaded. I want the output to be React Mongo.json. Like Konadu said, we allow you to choose which components you want to include in your pattern. So that's another element of Calm that's very nifty. So I chose React Mongo because I'm using a React front end and a Mongo database. So that generates that into my workspace. And let me just split that so you can see the left and right. So essentially, let me close this so you see. So this is the pattern on the left and the actual architecture on the right. I'll show you the architecture now. So I have one React node with technology. I have a producer service, as Konadu mentioned. And Konadu has specified that when you instantiate this pattern, you need to provide a service URL or a URL interface where the service can be found and a path where I can send API calls to a path interface. There's also a Mongo database, as I said, and the relationship. She has specified that I need to provide a control config for this requirement. Again, this is the requirements that, this is the requirement that she's talking about. I need to provide an authentication mechanism, auth method, token expiry, and what's a few. So, what I'm going to do next is I want to push this back to Calm Hub. I've modified this architecture, made some changes. I want to push it back to Calm Hub. Calm has a validate command that will check whether what I have, the architecture I have, conforms to the pattern that Konadu has created. This way, you can be sure that whatever requirement she puts into her pattern will be met, because Calm validate will tell you whether the architecture I'm going to create actually conforms to what she's created. So I have a Python script that will do this. Essentially, I'm simulating the CI/CD pipeline that you see how the validation and pushing will occur. So let me actually clear this. 3. Pipeline validate. The party 3 tier. The architecture is React Mongo. And when it is validated, I want to send OSFF25 namespace. So what do we see here? So we tried to validate it, said it failed. It's complaining that I've not provided a configuration for the control requirement that Konadu requested. So essentially, it's not valid because you have to supply those values for it to valid. So that's what most of these are complaining about. Another thing it's complaining about is I have placeholders in my architecture. I've not filled in the values she's requiring I fill. So I'm going to do that manually so that we see what is going on. So I'm going to first provide a URL. osff.service.com. You can say API calls to /API, and I need to provide a control config for this requirement. So control config. Second. And these are all, and this is all part of the CALM schema. So this is actually an expected property that's being used in there. So I'm just going to pick the example that was given because it's faster that way. So I'm going to use the exact example to satisfy this control config. Save that. Again, now I'm going to run my pipeline again. So validated successfully, going to CALM Hub. I can go to CALM Hub, architecture, see that in there, visualize, see my React application. So I can share this with my non-technical stakeholders. I can show people who are not technical this architecture, and I can see the details of them when I click them. So you see the React page and the interfaces I specified. So this is the example workflow. An architect in different units. Once the entire enterprise uses the same architecture, adjacent architecture like CALM, an architect can create their pattern, publish it, go through all the reviews that says that if you pick this pattern, go through these, fill in these values, supply these requirements, and then your architecture will be valid. That means from an oversight perspective, a security officer can see if anyone uses this pattern. We are sure that if your pattern is valid if your architecture is valid against this pattern, we can pass you very quickly. So reduce the burden on manual reviews. So yes, that is, let me see. So that's essentially one of the example of a CALM workflow. There's a lot more that can happen after CALM. And we have a talk right after this by one of the lead maintainers who are actually going to see an enterprise use case of CALM, where it's actually being used currently. So we have this our website, this our GitHub. We have meetings every last Tuesday of every month, and weekly on Thursdays at 2:30 GMT. So keep calm and be an architect. Thank you. Do you have any questions? I guess we have 1 minute for questions. All right, thank you. Yes. So in our this work, we're building. So we're going to see a use case of it in one of the firms we work with. But nowadays, we are building toolings around this, like translations, to allow security reviews to happen quicker. So we are finding ways to use CALM to build a security tool to validate that, okay, if someone comes in and wants to build an application in post-production, this will form the backbone of our application. So we define the pattern in CALM, we'll visualize it, and if you use that pattern, you just have to supply architecture that is valid against that pattern. And as a security officer, I'm okay because I have done the review before. So the review doesn't have to happen 5 times, it happens just once. So yes, it's actually happening being used in a real use case. So I'm about to see that after this.
What would you say is the benefit something like this, or writing a long Jira describing it?
So this is One, version controllable. So if you have a long Jira, it's difficult to share. You could see everything there. It's difficult to share. It's version controllable. You can track changes over time. JSON is used by most developers. It's a very common tool. So it's easy to build tooling around it. We're using JSON schema as the foundation for the architecture. So we're able to extend our pattern to put in our opinion. So you see, we have like a one-off. You could even have conditionals in JSON. So it's actually a great tool that everyone knows to use for architecture. Hi.
Two questions, actually. Sorry, I just mistake. I initially part with I was trying to find you. Is there a kind of local kind of developing software to just drag and drop like this?
Yes. It's actually one of the on the roadmap. So every thesis we meet, yes, because not everyone is technical to actually create one. Oh, sorry. He asked if there's a way to do it visually without having to do what I did. Yes, that is actually on the roadmap because they are non-technical people want to use CALM, so it's able to create a CALM document using the UI.
The second question is, thanks very much. The second question is there a kind of thinking or intent to just make it even deployable? Like, for example, for the infrastructure building blocks, use the cross-plane or Terraform or transform it to the Terraform script or something like that, creating source code for the microservices, etc., etc.
Yes, that's actually great that you mentioned that. You see, we have the talk that comes after touched on that, but that's actually one of the powerful parts about CALM. Because it's JSON, you can manipulate it anyhow you want to fit your specific use case. So we could have taken, for instance, the manual filling I didn't have to happen. I could have a YAML file that marries the data, having the configuration elsewhere. I can turn this data. I know the format is very predictable and it's a flat JSON, so I can turn it into a Terraform script and deploy if I want to. Yeah. So that's actually one of the main part. One of the best parts about using JSON or JSON schema as the foundation for CALM.